In episode 6, you find out that Wendy called the ambulance for Darlene. Maybe against her better judgment, but it did save her life. Darlene's in the hospital recovering, and she is pissed off at Ruth. She tells Wyatt, I don't want Ruth in my house again. This whole situation is because of her. Wyatt, though, is torn. I mean, after all, Ruth is his literal family. But Darlene tells him, I'm your family, and Zeke is your family. Over at the birdhouse, they're planning on moving back to Chicago. They're putting the steps in place. There's one bird that's missing, though. Jonah is over at Darlene's babysitting Zeke. They don't really have time to talk about it, though, because Marty gets a phone call from Maya, who is livid. Marty gave them information on yet another Navarro bust, but this time, Javi and the cartel were ahead of it. Instead of drugs or guns, what the FBI found was a bomb. It went off, and 4 FBI agents are in critical condition. When Marty hears this, he tells Wendy to call up Navarro. Marty tries to reassure Maya that this wasn't Navarro. He needs this to work more than anybody else. And as Marty is trying to talk Maya down, Wendy's on the other line trying to find out exactly what happened from Navarro's standpoint. Everybody knows that this wasn't Omar, it was Javi's doing. And Omar tells Wendy, I'm going to handle my nephew. But in the meantime, have Maya set up a meeting with her bosses. Wendy doesn't think that the FBI is going to want to meet Navarro since federal agents were targeted, but when Navarro wants to meet, Navarro's not going to wait. Wendy then relays that message to Marty. Marty relays it to Maya, and it takes a little bit of convincing, but Maya is able to set up a meeting between Marty and some of the higher-ups at the FBI's office in Chicago. As Marty heads up to Chicago to meet with the FBI, Wendy goes off to try to secure some services from an attorney, Jim. She wants to make their relationship official. No more freelance stuff, exclusively theirs. But in order to do this, Jim wants full transparency on what exactly is going on, and Wendy tells him that they launder money for the Navarro cartel. That's a business that Jim isn't really interested in being in. He has this weird rule about not getting into bed with people that could kill him. But Wendy puts on the charm, convinces him that he wouldn't be Navarro's lawyer, he would be their lawyer, and at the end of it, Jim agrees to come on board. After wrapping up the deal with Jim, Wendy goes to the hospital to gloat a little bit to Darlene. She tells Darlene, I want you to let Jonah go. I mean, look at yourself. Just a mention of Marty's deal with Ruth and Wyatt and Charlotte put you in the hospital. A third bird in your life? That could kill you. Darlene doesn't want to give up Jonah, though, telling Wendy that he can stay with her as long as he wants to. So Wendy gets real with Darlene. She says, we took your land to build our casino. We took your heroin and gave it to our partners. And we can take everything else you have. Now, are you prepared for that? Let him go. Darlene tries to tough talk Wendy, but it's really tough to do with the current state she's in. No one's going to take her seriously. The nurse comes in, breaks up the conversation, and Wendy heads home. But she's waiting for Marty to get back from Chicago. And the meeting with the FBI at first doesn't go well, but at the end of it, all the FBI wants is proof that Omar had nothing to do with the bombing. If they get that, they're willing to work with him. Marty calls up Navarro and tries to give him the message, but Navarro just kind of hangs up on him. But when Navarro hangs up on Marty, he takes Javi to the side and tells him, this is your time now, nephew. I'm stepping down. The Navarro cartel is all yours. Javi is definitely a little skeptical, thinking there might be something up, but Omar just tells him, no, there's nothing up. I'm going to spend more time with my kids, and the birds have made me a fortune. The sheer mention of the birds, though, sets Javi off. He still doesn't trust them. He starts railing against Marty and the whole situation, and Omar says, yeah, I know. That's why I'm getting all my assets out now and passing the torch to you, while I still can. After that, the birds are yours. They hug it out, and then Javi heads on the first flight to Chicago. The next day, Darlene Snell gets sent home from the hospital. But when she gets home, Ruth is still there, and that sets Darlene off. Wyatt knows that in her state, she really shouldn't get so riled up, so he grabs Ruth and pulls her outside. And all Ruth was trying to do was to explain that the deal that she did with Marty and Frank Jr. was best for the business. But when Wyatt pulls her outside, she starts to plead with Wyatt to leave. She tells him, you, me, and 3, we have more money than we know what to do with. Let's just get a boat and get out of here. Wyatt doesn't want to leave. He gives Ruth the whole family line, but this time choosing Darlene and Zeke as his family and reassuring her, this will all work out. Don't even worry about it. And then heading inside. And it's also contentious over at the Bird residence where Jonah tells them, I'm not moving back to Chicago. And immediately Marty and Wendy tell him, yeah, you are. Jonah angrily heads off to school. And before Wendy can head off, she gets a phone call from the tip line about Ben. There was a body found fitting his description, and she's going to have to go and identify it and tell them that it's not his. So she heads up to do that. Marty then heads to the Missouri Bell thinking it's business as usual, but it's not. Javi's there waiting for him. And Javi tells him, I'm the new boss. My uncle's stepping down and I want to see your books immediately. As he's looking over the finances, he tells Marty that he wants to treat this business like a tech giant because he's providing a service all over the world and they should act like it. Marty nervously agrees, and then they start going over the assets the cartel currently owns. Javi continues to go over the books and says to Marty, we should find you larger accounts and up your game. And that's when he suggests moving Marty to Macau. There's a ton of casinos there, and Javi thinks Marty's skill set would be best suited there. It's not like Marty's going to argue with him, so he just says, yeah, I hear it's beautiful. The conversation then moves into Maya's loyalty, but when Javi wants to talk to her and have a direct line to her, Marty says she still only talks to me. Javi kind of chuckles and tells him that's going to have to change, especially if you're in Macau. And then he leaves. And as soon as he does leave, Marty hops on the phone with Omar. He tells him, your nephew just showed up here and tried to brainstorm when would be a good time to kill me and my entire family. You said you were going to take care of him, not give him the keys to the kingdom. Omar says, tell the FBI they can have it all. The money, the routes, the leadership, everything. Marty loves the way that Omar is thinking, but he says, I still need to get proof that he did the bombing. And Omar reminds Marty that Javi is still in the Ozarks, so get it yourself. Marty calls up the FBI, and they bug the Missouri Bell with hopes of catching Javi admitting to stuff. And when Javi shows up, he does indeed admit to trying to kill federal agents on U.S. soil. It's exactly what they were looking for. But they don't arrest Javi right then and there. They're just building a case. And as Marty is helping the FBI build that case, Wendy was down telling a coroner that the dead body in their possession is not her brother's. As she's driving back to the Ozarks, she calls up Jim and asks what the procedure would be for a minor getting arrested for wire fraud, and if they can in fact scrap that from his record. Jim tells her that because it's a tricky situation, it probably would make the news, and with his connections and Wendy's connections, they could do a pretty good job of scrapping it from his record. So on the way home, she makes a pit stop at the Lazy O. She convinces Sam to let her in the room that Jonah's working out of, claiming that it has to do with his homework. But when she gets in there, she starts snooping around and finds the routing numbers that he's currently used to launder Darlene's money. She then makes an anonymous tip to a watch group and gets the accounts flagged. Now that same night, Jonah heads on over to the Lazy O and continues to launder Darlene's money, but that's when his account gets flagged. Jonah starts freaking out. He calls up Ruth and says, we have a problem, and explains it, and Ruth tells him, call your dad. So Jonah does that and waits for Marty to come over. Ruth, meanwhile, heads on up to Kansas City, because after what Darlene did, she needs to let Frank Jr. know. Her and Frank Jr. made amends on what happened in the past. But after what happened with her own dad, she doesn't want Frank Jr. wondering his entire life what happened to his father. So she just flat out tells him, Darlene Snell killed your dad. But let me get out, and then you can do whatever you want with her. And by the look in Frank Jr.'s eyes, it's not going to be good for Darlene. Back down in the Ozarks, though, Marty proves Ruth right. He comes over, he fixes the issues with Jonah, but as he looks deeper into the files, he realizes that the account wasn't flagged by a government agency. It was flagged by a third party. And Marty knows that the third party was tipped off by Wendy. He's certainly not going to tell Jonah that, though. Just reminding Jonah that they have dinner that night and to head home. But as Jonah is heading home, he runs into Sam. And Sam mentions how Wendy had stopped on by earlier to help out with his, quote, homework. And that's when Jonah figures out that it was Wendy who ratted him out. When Jonah gets home, he comes in hot and accuses Wendy of trying to get him arrested. Wendy admits to it, telling Jonah that it's an important lesson, and he screams, I could have went to jail. Even Marty's pretty disgusted by her behavior. Jonah storms off, and Wendy and Marty once again start fighting about how they both are handling the situation. The conversation gets so heated that Marty at one point says, when me and you get back to Chicago, you and I are... And Wendy just cuts him off, asking him, what do you think's waiting for you there? Our old life? Because that was a lie. The argument gets interrupted when Marty gets a phone call. And that phone call is to let him know that they are to deliver Omar Navarro to the FBI in 12 hours. The deal is on. But that's when Charlotte lets both of them know that Jonah has taken off. And Jonah's headed to the Lazy O, where the owner has had quite a day. After Frank Sr. found out that Darlene pressured Frank Jr. to buy her heroin, he got real pissed off. He headed and confronted Darlene about it, cursing her out, calling her a terrible mother, and demanding the money that she owed him. But she treated him just like she treated the driver, taking a shotgun out and shooting him. When Wyatt gets home, he sees the body of Frank Sr., and he's in shock. He truly feels like she has gone too far this time. He heads to Ruth's house and just explains she shot Frank Sr. And Ruth once again tells him, let's leave, let's get out of here. And finally, Wyatt is on board with this. But Wyatt can't just pack up and leave. He feels like he owes it to Darlene to break up with her properly. He even practices this. But when it comes time to actually do it, he walks in to find Darlene crying because Wendy, earlier in the day, had called child services on Darlene to get baby Zeke out of that house. Darlene figures she probably has a week left with the baby. It's not the best time to break up with someone. But Wyatt goes the extreme route. Instead of breaking up with her, he proposes to her, figuring that if he's in the household, child services is not going to take that baby. Darlene, of course, says yes, and then they have a very gross, uncomfortable makeout session. It's yucky. It's really yucky. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. But once again, thank you for checking out this recap.